I offered my wife's tombstone a tuna sandwich, and that's where my nightmare truly began. This simple act of love and grief was meant to honor her memory. Instead, it put me on the radar of a monster, proving that even in death, love can make you the perfect prey. It all started because I offered my wife's tombstone a tuna sandwich. I know how that sounds. Batshit crazy, right? But for me, it was the only sane thing left to do. It was our ritual. My Emma, she was one of a kind. For our first date, I took her for a picnic on the beach down at Miller Point. I'd spent the morning making these perfect tuna salad sandwiches, a little celery for crunch, a touch of dill, crusts cut off just the way my mom taught me. When I asked if she liked tuna, she just smiled that easy smile of hers and said, "Sure, Jack." So we had tuna picnics. A lot. It became our thing. A year later, on our first anniversary, we were back at that same spot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I handed her the sandwich, wrapped in wax paper. She took it, but this time she hesitated. "Jack," she said, her voice soft. "I have a confession to make. I absolutely, positively, despise tuna fish. The smell, the texture, it's like cat food for people. No offense." I stared at her, my own mouth half full of the stuff. She explained that on our first date, she'd never really had it before and figured she'd be fine. But the moment she took that first bite, she felt her soul trying to leave her body. The only reason she swallowed it was because she saw the effort I'd put in, the care in my eyes. She didn't want to hurt the feelings of this earnest guy who cut the crusts off her bread. I just threw my head back and roared with laughter. It was the most Emma thing ever. From that day on, it was our joke. At every picnic, every time I made a sandwich for lunch, I'd hold it out to her first and ask, "Bite?" And she'd playfully gag and tell me to get that poison away from her. Last year, the laughter stopped. Valentine's Day. She was rushing home from her job as a paralegal. I'd been on my feet all day at the garage, but I'd booked it home early to cook her favorite steak dinner. There was a patch of black ice on the overpass. The cops said it was instantaneous. My world didn't just shrink, it collapsed into a black hole. For 3 months, the house was a tomb. The silence was a physical weight. I'd just sit in my armchair, the one she always claimed was hers, and stare at the wall. The only thing that kept me moving was Harry, the old groundskeeper at the cemetery. He was a Vietnam vet, tough as nails, with eyes that had seen too much. He'd just nod when I came, never offering those empty platitudes everyone else did. One day in May, the sun was out for the first time in what felt like forever. On a whim, I found myself in the kitchen, my hands moving on their own. Slicing bread. Mixing mayo and tuna. Wrapping a sandwich. I packed a small basket and drove to Meadowlawn Cemetery. Her grave is on a gentle slope, under a big, old elm tree that looks like it's been there since the beginning of time. I spread out the old red checkered blanket. Without thinking, the words just came out. "Bite, M." I held the sandwich out to the cold, granite headstone. The absurdity of it hit me so hard, a sound I hadn't made in months escaped my chest. It was a laugh. A real, gut-deep laugh. It felt like breaking the surface after being held underwater for too long. So I kept doing it. Our picnic dates. They were my lifeline. Then came August. I was just unfurling the blanket when a freak gust of wind ripped it from my hands. It billowed up like a parachute and sailed down the hill, wrapping itself completely around a woman standing by another grave. I sprinted down, yelling apologies. She was tangled up, struggling clumsily. She looked like a ghost trying to escape its own shroud. I helped her pull it free, my hands brushing against hers. When the blanket came away, I found myself staring into the deepest blue eyes I'd ever seen, framed by a cascade of curly black hair. "Well, she said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. That's one way to meet. Her name was Ruth. She was visiting her husband, Christian. It was a recent loss, she said. A sailing accident. We didn't talk much more that day, just a shared, knowing glance of two people in the same miserable club. I started seeing her there more often. A polite nod became a small wave. Then one afternoon, as I was packing up, she walked over. That's a sweet ritual you have, she said, her voice like quiet music. She gestured towards Emma's stone. The sandwich. I told her the story. A real smile bloomed on her face this time. That's beautiful. Christian, he loved tuna, actually. Couldn't get enough of it. She looked at me then, her gaze intense, searching. Do you ever feel like the grief itself is a kind of sacred place? Almost heavenly. I was taken aback. No one had ever described grief like that. It was always a pit, a burden. But the way she said it, it felt true. Sure, I managed to say. Her talking about Christian's love for tuna, it felt like a sign. A weird, cosmic bridge between our two losses. When I asked her for coffee, it felt less like a betrayal and more like a continuation. Of course, the guilt came later that night. A tidal wave of it. I was asking another woman out, practically standing on my wife's grave. But my buddies, and even Harry the groundskeeper, told me I was being too hard on myself. That woman, Ruth, Harry said one afternoon, leaning on his rake. She's been coming here a while. Even before her husband passed, I think. She's quiet. Carries a heavy soul. You two, you look right together. Over coffee, Ruth and I didn't just talk, we bled our grief out onto the table. But I noticed something odd. Whenever I talked about Emma, I'd share little stories, specific memories. When Ruth talked about Christian, it was always in broad strokes. He was so full of life. The silence in the house is the worst part. It was generic, like she was reading from a script titled How to Grieve. I chalked it up to the pain being too fresh, too raw to excavate the details. One night, a dinner date ran late, and a storm rolled in. She stayed. The morning after was a complex cocktail of tenderness and gut-wrenching shame. I felt like I was cheating on a ghost. But life, stubbornly, began to move forward. When her landlord jacked up her rent, offering her my spare room felt like the natural next step. Temporarily, of course. For a few months, it was almost normal. We'd cook dinner. Watch movies. We even went on a few picnics. But I never made tuna. It felt wrong. Disloyal. The first crack in the facade appeared when she asked me what we should do for Valentine's Day. The words hit me like a physical blow. Valentine's Day. The 1-year anniversary of Emma's death. The day the world ended. Suddenly, the guilt wasn't just a wave, it was a tsunami. I was living with another woman on the anniversary of my wife's death. What kind of monster does that? I decided I had to do both. I would spend the morning with Emma, my real Valentine. Then the afternoon with Ruth. I needed to say goodbye properly. And, I admitted to myself, I needed to visit Christian's grave, too. To pay my respects. To let him know I'd take care of her. A few days before the 14th, I went to Meadowlawn alone. It was a reconnaissance mission. I knew the general area where I always saw Ruth. Down the hill from Emma, past a small cluster of oak trees. I found the headstone she usually stood near. But it wasn't for Christian Mary. It was for a couple named Presley, who had died together in the 1990s. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I started walking, row by row. I searched for a full hour. No Christian Mary. I found Harry clearing some leaves near his shed. Harry, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Can you look up a plot for me? A man named Christian Mary. He wiped his hands on his overalls and went inside. He came back out with a grim look on his face. Yeah, I can. But you're not gonna like it. He led me to a completely different section of the cemetery. A newer, less scenic part far from the elm trees and rolling hills. And there it was. A simple, flat headstone. Christian Mary. Beloved husband. 1988 to 2024. The date of death was October 6th. My blood ran cold. The blanket incident, the day we met, was in early August. She had been visiting a random grave, for weeks, 2 months before her husband even died. That night, at dinner, I tried to be casual. Hey, Ruth, I was thinking. I'd like to visit Christian's grave on Valentine's Day. Pay my respects. Where is he, exactly? She froze, a forkful of lasagna halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted around, like a cornered animal. Why? I just thought it would be a nice thing to do. I pressed on gently. I looked around that spot where I always used to see you, but I couldn't find him. He's further down, she said, her voice tight. I don't like going right to the grave. It's too much. I get it, I said, lying. So, when did he pass again? Was it late summer? Why are you doing this? Her eyes filled with tears. Why are you interrogating me? Don't you know how hard this is? The conversation was over. She retreated behind a wall of tears, and I was the villain for even asking. After she went to bed, I did what I should have done months ago. I dug deeper than a simple Google search. I went through public records, news archives from the coastal town where she said the sailing accident happened. I found it. A small article about a body recovered from the water on August 6th. Not October. August. But the name wasn't Christian Mary. It was a man named David Miller. The article mentioned he was survived by his fiancée. It didn't give her name. My mind was reeling. The dates, the names, the locations, none of it made sense. It was a web of lies, and I was tangled in the middle of it. The next time she said she was going to the cemetery to clear her head, I followed her. She didn't go to the Presley grave. She didn't go to Christian Mary's grave. She walked to a remote bench overlooking a small pond. She sat there for a few minutes, and then a man with a scraggly beard sat down next to her. It was the man from the bench. I watched from behind a large mausoleum as they talked. Their body language wasn't romantic. It was businesslike. He handed her a small vial, which she slipped into her purse. They shook hands. It wasn't a lover's tryst. It was a transaction. I felt a profound sense of relief, which was the craziest part. Being cheated on felt like justice for betraying Emma. It felt like cosmic punishment, and in a sick way, I welcomed it. But the image of that vial haunted me. Valentine's Day arrived. The air was cold and heavy with unspoken words. I had to see Emma. I had to tell her everything. I made 2 tuna sandwiches, my hands shaking slightly. I packed the basket. As I was about to leave, Ruth called down from upstairs. Jack, honey? Can you come here for a second? I think there's a huge spider in the bathtub. I sighed and went up. There was no spider. Must have run off, she said, smiling a little too brightly when I came back down. She handed me my keys, which I'd left on the counter. Have a good talk with her, she said, and kissed my cheek. At the cemetery, the words poured out of me. I knelt in the cold, damp grass and confessed everything to Emma's headstone. The loneliness, meeting Ruth, the lies, the vial, the gnawing feeling that I had stumbled into something dark and dangerous. I'm so sorry, Em, I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. I messed up. I just miss you so much. After a while, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had confessed my sins. I unpacked our picnic. "Bite, I said, holding out the sandwich. The silence was my answer. I unwrapped my own sandwich and took a large bite. It tasted off. A bitter, metallic tang underneath the familiar taste of mayo and dill. Then it started. A tightness in my chest. My throat felt like it was swelling shut. I tried to take a breath, but it was like trying to suck air through a wet coffee stirrer. My arms and legs felt like they were filled with lead. I dropped the sandwich, clawing at my chest. I was dying. On top of my wife's grave. The irony was so cruel it was almost poetic. I collapsed onto my back, my vision tunneling. The last thing I saw was a figure standing over me. Ruth. Her face was devoid of all emotion. It was a blank, terrifying mask. "You're not the first, you know," she said, her voice calm and clinical. She knelt beside me, picking up the half-eaten sandwich. "But you were the sweetest. The tuna thing? That was a brilliant piece of theater. It made you so beautifully, authentically broken." I tried to speak, to scream, but only a gurgle came out. "The men I choose, they have to love their dead wives. Truly love them. It's the only way it works," she continued, as if discussing the weather. "I study them. I learn their favorite songs, their little jokes, their fears. I learn how to become the perfect replacement." "Christian? Oh, he wasn't my husband. He was just practice. A stepping stone to learn the landscape of this place." She looked from me to Emma's headstone. I learned all about Emma. How she hated tuna. It made the story I was building for you so much richer. The story of the grieving husband who couldn't let go, who joins his beloved wife on the anniversary of her death. They'll find the note in your picnic basket. Your handwriting. It'll be very tragic. She took a piece of the poisoned sandwich and moved it towards my mouth. "Just one more bite, Jack. For Emma." A surge of pure, primal adrenaline shot through me. This bitch wasn't going to kill me on my wife's grave. With the last ounce of strength I had, I bucked my hips upwards, violently. Her body was thrown forward. Her head connected with the sharp, granite edge of Emma's tombstone with a sickening, wet crack. She crumpled sideways, a dark line of blood instantly appearing above the engraved words "beloved wife." My body was convulsing, but I was fueled by rage. I rolled, clawed, and dragged myself down the hill, right through a funeral service that was just concluding. I must have been a horrifying sight, my face turning blue, gasping and retching. I woke up in the hospital. The first thing they told me was that the sandwich was laced with a massive dose of a fast-acting shellfish toxin, concentrated and refined. The man on the bench, Gavin, was a disgraced chemist. The vial was his delivery. They told me Ruth, whose real name wasn't even Ruth, was in a coma. They told me she was a predator, a grief parasite who targeted widowers, drained their assets, and then staged their suicides when she was done. The man whose death was reported as a sailing accident? David Miller? He was her last victim before me. She'd been scouting me at the cemetery for a month before we even met. She chose the Presley grave to watch me from because it had a clear line of sight to Emma's plot. They're still piecing it all together. I got out of the hospital yesterday. The first place I went, the only place I could go, was back to Meadow Lawn. I needed to see Emma. I needed to apologize for the blood on her stone. When I got to the top of the hill, my legs almost gave out. There, resting against the base of her tombstone, was a small, neatly wrapped parcel. Wax paper, tied with a simple string. It was a tuna sandwich. There was no note. No one was around. Just the wind whistling through the branches of the old elm tree. I don't know who left it. The police say Ruth's accomplice, Gavin, is still at large. Maybe it was him. A message. A threat. Or maybe it was just some well-meaning stranger who'd heard my story. But as I stand here, staring at it, I can't help but think. The story of the man who loves his dead wife. The story that almost got me killed. It's a good story. And maybe someone else out there thinks it's a story worth continuing.